Thank you for that introduction. I am the executive director at the McNulty Foundation. We are a private family foundation established some 30 years ago. I think this is kind of a unique room for us to be talking about our work in because we so often talk about challenging our undergraduate women to reach the highest level of leadership in STEM. And so to be a guest here of the society, hear from individuals like Dr. Mcneil, and all of you who are living and breathing in this space is a real treat. Supporting and advancing leaders, and in particular, women leaders, is a major focus at the McNulty Foundation. The individual leader is our unit of change, and we see leadership really as those individuals who are solving our most difficult problems and creating opportunities for others. Our CEO, Ann Welsh McNulty, who couldn't be here today, was really a trailblazer in her field. And I think she's the first to admit that when she was coming out of undergrad, she was in one of the first class of women at Villanova. And she thought, okay, it's just a pipeline problem. Now that we're here, we're going to climb right up through the ranks. And of course, 40 years later, not quite the case. So this work is deeply personal to her, and it's a privilege to work at a foundation that's so personally inspired. We have been doing this work with the undergraduate institutions represented on the panel for over 10 years, some fewer years than others. And these are some of our most talented and dedicated leaders of the programs that we do at St. Joseph's University, at Hunter College, and Villanova University. So I'm going to first ask our panelists to introduce themselves and their role with our programs and as protagonists.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Teri Boyer. I direct the Ann Welsh McNulty Institute for Women's Leadership at Villanova. I'm, I think, the baby of the group. We're just over 2 years old. We celebrated our second birthday a couple weeks ago. And the Institute was Villanova's first concerted effort to advance women across the university. So we are, as Aprile mentioned, 40 years or so past the full co-ed institution, and yet at the same time didn't have anything that recognized that it's not just a pipeline issue and we need to be doing more to promote women's advancement. So the mission of the Ann Welsh McNulty Institute for Women's Leadership is to promote the advancement of women through education, community building, advocacy, and the collaborative creation of new knowledge. And we do that through research and scholarship. So we promote and disseminate research that advances women and gender equity. We do that through leadership development, so actually working with individuals on developing their skills and breaking down some of those barriers that tend to hold women back from advancement. Advocacy and awareness. Why do we still need a leadership institute after so many years of having women in that pipeline? And finally, networks and connections. So how do we look at those systems that women participate in, and how do we better create access to the kinds of networks and connections that we know lead to advancement to the top of leadership?
So hi, my name is Kelle Cruz. I'm the director of the John P. McNulty Scholars Program for Leadership at Hunter College. I'm a physicist by training, so I'm an astronomer. I actually did my undergrad and graduate work here at Penn, so I'm having a little bit of a reminiscent day, seeing all these new fancy glass buildings. Our program is dedicated to that high touch on undergraduate women in STEM. So we have typically they're junior and seniors, but I also like to phrase it that they're 1 to 2 years before going to graduate school. And so we focus on a lot of leadership programming. So we meet with them every 2 weeks, approximately twice a month, to give them professional development information. We also support their attendance to conferences. So how to what conferences they should be attending, how to have the conversation with their PI about which conference they should be attending. So we really give them a lot of one-on-one attention. So then later in the calendar, we also talk about how to choose summer research programs, how to choose grad schools. One of the big things that we've been talking a lot about lately is their peer mentorship network. And so how important it is for them to be very deliberate about having peer mentors, and how important that's actually a skill building to becoming successful leaders. One of the things that I really appreciate about the program at Hunter College is the demographics of Hunter. So Hunter is traditionally a women's college, first of all. So our undergraduate population skews a little bit more. Most colleges skew a little bit more towards women, but Hunter is even more so. So we already have a lot of women, but they're also they represent the diversity of New York City. So we have many women of color, many first generation or new immigrants. And so we have a lot of cultural things, adapting to the U.S. system and understanding how to succeed in these roles. So happy to talk more about the work that we do with that program at Hunter.
Oh, good morning. Am I on? Yep. Oh, good. Likewise, I'm back home as well. Did my graduate work here back in the 1980s. So, but I'm back on campus a lot, so I've seen the change sort of continually. So anyway, I'm Paul Angiolillo, and I'm a professor of physics at St. Joseph's University, and also serving as interim associate dean. So just some advice for some of you out there: never do that. Anyway, I'm honored to be here this morning, and I'm the director of the John P. McNulty Scholars Program at St. Joseph's, and we're 11 years in now, and I've been involved with that program since its inception, originally as part of the selection committee, and its director now in my fourth year. And just to contrast our program briefly with that of Hunter's, we're a cohort program, so students come in their freshman year, and we take about 5 to 8 students in each year, and we've graduated over 50. And as this discussion ensues, we'll talk about those outcomes. Like Hunter, we concentrate on scholarship, mentoring, and we're now building our leadership program. We've got the academic piece down. Now we're trying to address the leadership piece, and so we're really working hard to that end. But I'm honored to be here this morning, and please, I'm sure there'll be some questions. Please don't hesitate to ask us. So, thank you.
Yes, we will have time for questions at the end. So Teri, will you set the landscape for us? And really, in particular in STEM, I know you have deep expertise coming into this position. You led Women in Work at Rutgers. How do you see the landscape?
Right. And actually, we were having a conversation in preparation for this and talking about that. And I think what's really interesting about where we are right now in advancing women in STEM is that it's been well established that women it's not a pipeline issue, right? That we've added women to the pipeline, or now the pathway, as we like to talk about it. And yet, despite that, we're still looking at issues in leadership, access to leadership and power roles within the fields of STEM. And so as such, what we're beginning to see is that we've been focused time and time again on intervention strategies. We're gonna do this, we're gonna do that, we're gonna intervene here, et cetera, but we aren't yet fully focused on what we're intervening in, right? And that's the system. That's the system that needs to change, those structural inequities that impact people who are coming from underrepresented identities, underrepresented backgrounds. And that's where the real change is beginning to happen. And so it's exciting to see a room full of people that are working towards this, but at the same time, we have to understand that it's the whole system now that we need to address and change.
Please.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in on that. And again, while we were talking earlier, actually, when I was in graduate school here, I worked in Johnson Research Foundation, which is in Richard's building, just a stone's throw from here. And the person who ran that foundation, Britton Chance, and some of you might recognize that name in this hall, was quite the visionary. And as I was telling my folks here earlier, is that it was close to parity with women scientists and men scientists in the Johnson Foundations. My thesis advisor was a woman, and it wasn't till after I left here that I began to see the issues, especially when I got into academia myself. And at St. Joseph's, and I'm sure like many of your institutions, we're trying to create the lifetime learner, right? So the lifelong student, and I consider myself still a student of this area. So I wake up in the morning, I still make mistakes, and I have my colleagues here and to help me navigate those waters, and but I just wanted to throw those ideas out there. So I think Dr. Caldwell said earlier that men need to be very much involved in this process, and I agree completely. Through the McNulty program at St. Joseph's, I always say I still have 2 sons, but in the McNulty program I have 26 daughters, and so and it has been and still is every day a real wonderful process for me to be involved in watching them grow and mature, and to help and them to help me learn as well.
Kelly?
Yeah, just to talk a little bit more about the landscape. That's an interesting question to help focus our what are we intervening in? And I think that what we've found is that these high touch programs where we're giving a lot of attention to giving underrepresented people and marginalized folks access to power, right? All the information about the unwritten rules definitely helps. It makes a difference, and I think that's where our programs, have been successful. But the landscape is that we need to keep doing this, and we need to do more of it for more people, so that we can change all of the systematic structures, so that it's not you have to be in a special program in order to learn how the system works, or that you have to be in a special program to get a supportive mentor. We need to be doing more work at all levels in order to be raising all boats.
It's interesting because when previous to coming to Villanova, I did a lot of work with educational institutions who would come to our, either through a grant that I had or a center that I was running, would come to us and say, okay, we recognize we have an equity issue, right? We don't have enough women, we don't have enough people of color, so we'd like to do something to change that. And they would focus on maybe the hiring process, or which then goes back to the issue with MIT, right? So we're bringing in a lot of people, we'll change our hiring process, et cetera, but then nothing changed after that. So wait a minute there. We did something good, right? It was great, we had a good result, but then what happened, right? And then they'll say, well, we just need to work with our professors or our teachers, like to give them better strategies in the classroom. That's great, you might have some good outcomes there, et cetera, but then they go to look for careers and they're not adequately prepared for what the difference is between academia and the workplace or otherwise, and they're not set up to advance the way that you wanted them to. And so what I would always say to those organizations was, well, how committed are you to this? Because in order for you to really look and have that sort of change that you're looking for, you have to do this system-wide. And you have to analyze, you have to look at your data, you have to look at all of the touch points that your students are going through, and you have to, and their background, their identity, their experiences before they get to you. And all of those things put together is that formula, that extremely complex formula that leads to those outcomes in the end. But if you're not, if you as an institution say you want change, but you're not going to commit and do that on all of those levels, then you're not going to win in the long term. You're not going to have more than a needle moving for a little while, et cetera. That looks good. And don't get me wrong, it's good that we have, that MIT increased its women in its STEM departments. It's great that that happened, but we want more than that, right? We want to go back and say, okay, we've been doing this for 40 some years, let's see real change. And that's where that strength of commitment needs to come in.
Yeah, and I think as a funder, really, we've really seen that as our unique role. I mean, it takes a lot of patience, it takes a lot of time, and a lot of just asking the questions, elevating the questions to the senior-most leadership at the university, bringing people together across the silos of the university. And certainly at Villanova, we found we had so many women who were just waiting for us to show up and put up the name. And then there was an incredibly strong movement, which you have led. So I think we're getting a little bit to the ingredients of success and what needs to happen over time. And Kelle, I know you have really advocated for this very holistic approach. And so could you talk a little bit more about what some of your experiences have been and build on this?
Yeah, so with respect to undergrads, I've mentored a lot of undergrads, both as I think I had my first undergrad when I was a graduate student. I'm a delegator. I like to be very efficient. So I have lots of experience with undergrads, and I am surprised at how often faculty advisors are just asking about their research and not even asking about their classes, much less what else is going on in their life. And I think that when you're starting to, if you want to ensure the success of people who are statistically not likely to succeed, you need to mentor the entire student or mentor right now. So we've been having these conversations leading up to this discussion. So now my brain is full of all these ideas, and I want to use these different words like mentor the mentee, right? I want this mentorship. I want someone to mentor me entirely and to ask me everything about that's going on in my life and how this is going to impact my next growth move. Should I take that associate dean position or not? What's my next leadership role going to be? And so to think about what else going on in their home life, what's their financial situation, what's their emotional situation, what's going on in their classes. Maybe this week isn't the right week for you to be working on your science project. Maybe this conference that we talked about a month ago, maybe now is not the right time because we want to set you up for success in the long term. And so that type of mentoring the whole student, thinking about mentoring the entire mentee and thinking about everything that's going on in their life and providing them with the skills so that eventually they're able to do with the skills to know that they need to have their own peer network of figuring out, asking other people these questions so that they can work this stuff out when you're not there anymore. And also so that they're making the right decision so that they're being set up for success rather than for more frustration, more failure, and no sleep.
The holistic approach actually transcends just the undergraduate part. I know that our program initially just was, or most people thought on campus was a scholarship program for students in STEM. And what it's morphed into over 10 years is the university recognizing the successes of that program and the needs of the university as a whole to address leadership in general and women's leadership. And this has been really cross-cutting. So, we now have in our program, we have a McNulty Leadership Fellow, and she actually comes from the Department of Management, which is in the business school. So that program, initially was a seed, and now it's got visibility across the whole university, and everyone's getting involved. And I think that's I have to credit Aprile and the McNulty Foundation for constantly chiseling away at us to make us realize that, you know, the goal of this program was just not merely to educate women in the STEM areas, but to really serve as a catalyst, to use the title for today, as a catalyst for change across the university. And I think we're getting there.
And with no offense to you, I think in the early days, we had a hard time explaining why we wanted to have a woman director of the program to the male dean of arts and sciences. It was like they couldn't quite understand that need.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk a little bit about the role of faculty too in this, because I think, again, we as institutions of higher education, we often focus on students, right? And because that's our client, right? Like that's who we serve. But faculty are the touch points that stay a lot longer with the institution. And so investing in them is something that's really critical. And I was talking with a dean of a school of engineering a little while ago who was talking about how they're looking at retaining their women faculty and the challenges that they've faced with that, and that they had just this past year had 2 women faculty who did not make tenure. And so they asked me, okay, what should we do about this? And those people, by the way, those people shouldn't have gotten tenure. And I said, okay, let's think about that a second. Let's think about when the way academia works and when we invest in somebody in the tenure track position. That should be something that the whole university buys in on, because you are creating a scholar that has its return on investment, their return on investment is tremendous to the institution. And so you should be focusing so much of your efforts on making sure that person gets tenure, right? And so I asked, well, what mentoring programs do you have? Well, we don't actually have a mentoring program for them. Well, we do one-on-one mentors, but it's really challenging to find a one-on-one mentor. And I said, well, what do those one-on-one mentors focus on? Well, it's usually about their research, right? So in that instance, it's very much, okay, well, we're talking about research. But when you think about women and other underrepresented identities there, it's not just research that you need mentoring on, right? And that you need those connections for. And so we talked about how multiple models of mentoring, not just a one-on-one connection, mentoring committees or groups that are able to function to create that advice and support that's needed to create that advancement, but then also providing mentoring opportunities outside of your department or your college. Sometimes you need mentoring from somebody who's not going to have a say in your tenure and promotion. And that's another aspect that I think is absolutely critical here. And it was great because this dean was really open and excited to hear these things, but had clearly never thought outside, this is what our structure is. This is a person who did not fit well with our structure, and therefore they shouldn't have received tenure and gone forward. And you had to reframe that to get them to think, okay, if what you're saying is you'd like to have more people who don't fit with your structure succeed here, then we have to change that structure a little bit.
And just to throw it in, those mentoring positions should be paid
Right, they should be rewarded
in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the outcomes and successes that you've seen either inside our programs or beyond them. Paul, can you share what some of our students, this is one of our longest running
So,
programs. We're now seeing our
As I said earlier, we're in our 11th year. We've graduated over 50 women through the program. To date, we have never lost a woman along the way. So anyone who's come into the program has left successfely. Graduated, indeed. And for some of you who might not know, St. Joseph's is a relatively small college. I certainly wouldn't rank it up there with the Haverfords and the Bryn Mawrs, but we're a solid university. And I think we've used this this program to attract women who, quite frankly, wouldn't normally think about coming to St. Joseph's, and then providing them with this nurturing community. They've been very successful. So over the last 4 years, we've had back-to-back Goldwater Scholarship recipients. We've had back-to-back NSF Graduate Fellowship recipients in their senior year. These were things that, quite frankly, just never happened at a place like St. Joseph's. We've had students go off to graduate programs in mechanical engineering. Again, not something that women do generally, and we're really just went to 2 thesis defenses this past summer. Places like graduate schools like Harvard and University of Pennsylvania, Johns Hopkins. So we can boast of quite a litany of academic successes. But it goes beyond that. So the women who've reached their terminal degrees are now in residency programs, postdoctoral positions, and quite honestly, I stay in touch with them. Again, this goes back to high touch, but high touch beyond the graduation date, which I feel is just really important to establish that network of women beyond graduation and with their mentors. Many of the mentors have become lifelong friends, as myself, of their mentees. And so, I think those are the intangible successes that I think a program like this generates.
And seeing them come back and share their experiences.
I mean, just a little. So I've only been the director of this program for a year. This is my I guess third semester, and so I don't have at the tip of my tongue like all the graduation rates. But things that I've seen are students being able to quit their part-time job and be able to do more research because of the support which we've been able to give them, to realize that, everyone in their lab is going to a conference. They didn't think they were ready to go to that conference, or were afraid to ask their PI to ask if they could go. And then to be able to talk with us and end up going to that conference and getting a poster prize, at the conference. And so those types of it, like on one hand, I want to say it doesn't take a lot to give a student a transformative experience that's really going to set them up, for success as a leader. But then on the other hand, it's straightforward. It takes a lot of effort, but like the things that you need to do are not that difficult. The other thing that I wanted to say, which I've appreciated this effort on leadership, which is that so many of our scholars are also leaders and volunteers in other ways. And so we find out about they're the leader of their church choir, or they're also volunteering at a women's defense in a women's defense course or something like that. And so getting them to talk about those other leadership activities that they're doing, to recognize that as leadership, to recognize that as something that as a scientist, this is also valuable, and these are skills that we care about, and that we also want to hear about the things that they're doing outside of school, and that we're going to reward those activities as well, I think has also been transformative for them.
Teri, help us look ahead. What are the challenges and opportunities? What are you focusing on?
Well, it's interesting. I shared a story with Aprile. I was out in Chicago earlier last week doing a workshop session on gender communication in the double bind, which was absolutely fascinating discussion. But I had a 4th grade science teacher come up to me afterwards, and she had her laptop with her, and she talked about how she has it all the time in her classroom. And her students saw this little sticker that was on there, and it had an image on it. And they were like, what is that? What do you have? What's that picture that you have on there? And it was actually Rosalind Franklin's crystal structure of the DNA. And so she said, and they happened to be young girls, right? 4th grade girls. And so she said what it was, and she talked about Franklin's story. And they were absolutely adamant that this was, what? How horrible. That's a terrible story. How could that possibly happen? And Yes, exactly. The fact that, Watson and Crick, right? Not anyway. So these young girls were absolutely floored that this could occur. And when I think about the future, that's who I think about. That group of people who are like, this is something that could not happen in my world, right? Which clearly it has done. And so they need to understand and know the history and what's been there. But we need to preserve that this is horrible. And we need to get the other boys there, and everybody else along the gender spectrum saying, this is horrible. Nobody who does something like this should not be acknowledged or recognized for their work. So taking that and moving to that, looking at our institutions, looking at our high schools, our colleges, our workplaces, our labs, and making sure that that sort of thing is not crushed when those girls from 4th grade get to those labs, so they can see a lab that's supported, like Dr. McKnight talked about, where they feel valued and that they continue to be able to capitalize on that enthusiasm that they see.
And just to take it a little bit bigger in scope, which is that I tend to, in STEM and academia, we have more women, but I tend to think of women as the canary in the coal mine of marginalized groups. And so to take everything that we can learn and we think about, we can do these things for women, but also to apply those to other marginalized groups whose stories are much, much worse
Right.
than our stories.
Right, and I
As
think
women.
when we talk about women, we tend to have this, people's bias is towards like that white feminism, right? And we have to break that down in order to be successful. We can't focus on just one perception of what woman is in order to be successful.
Yeah. Well, great. I want to open up for questions. Do you have any questions for our wonderful panelists?
What are you doing to help women overcome obstacles? In other words, to help them understand that they shouldn't take no. Just give you an example. When I finished my bachelor's degree at Purdue, I was accepted to medical school. I just wanted to, I'll repeat. The question is, how do you teach girls, minorities, the underrepresented, to not exactly fight back, but to understand they're going to have a lot of obstacles, but they need to overcome them. For example, when I finished up at Purdue, I was accepted to medical school, but then I happened to meet a very handsome man in my senior year in March, and I was about to graduate in May. And we got married in May, and it was a long, happy marriage. The point I want to make is that I then went to my undergraduate advisor and said, look, I'd like to stay a year so that my husband and I can do our master's, and then together, I'll go on to med school and he'll go on to grad school together. The chairman said, we don't waste fellowships on women.
Mm-hmm.
Now, no chairman's going to say that today.
Not out loud.
But there are obstacles. So I didn't just sort of, weep and go out in the corner. I just got mad and went off and talked to my undergraduate advisor. And as it turned out, I got a graduate assistantship with him to do a genetics master's. But my point is, how do you teach the underserved women to overcome obstacles and not just let it happen?
So we have two things that we do specifically at the Institute, but I'll give them as examples of things that can be done. One, I'm going to point out Kelsey O'Donnell, who's a PhD student at Villanova in chem engineering, and she's one of our leadership ambassadors. So we actually have a group of 50 students who we work with. They participate in a leadership academy in the summer before the beginning of the academic year. And Villanova is a very traditional academic year program, so that works for us. And during those 2 days, they sit down and talk about things like what are the root causes of gender inequity. And they begin that awareness level. That first piece is awareness, right? So taking those girls who saw the Rosalind Franklin image and becoming aware of these are obstacles that you might face, but not crushing their spirit and going on by saying, okay, so these are the root causes. Now, what are theories of social change? What are theories of leadership development? And what's your leadership plan that you're going to work on to get a leadership statement, goals, objectives, et cetera, that help you continue to be able to address those obstacles when you see them? So building those skills individually. The same goes for our work with women faculty at Villanova. We have an advanced grant, and as part of that, we're working directly with women faculty on helping them form those networks and connections that are proven to help support. And when you're faced with somebody coming at you and saying something like, you're not welcome in my fellowship, or we don't waste it on that, you'd be surprised you still hear some things like that, if not that outright discrimination. But using those networks and connections to create a safe space where people feel that they can share and support each other, and then advocating for each other in that space and advocating with their chairs and their leadership teams to help them understand how implicit bias works and how that is, if it's not outright, there is implicit bias as well. And how do you recognize it and interrupt that bias as well?
And likewise, on a miniature scale, we now have a McNulty Leadership Fellow, and she's been charged with developing some workshops along this line. We've had some very successful outside people come in and have half-day workshops, and they've been very successful. There's a group called the Resilience Group, and also a local person who's coming in next February, and she's just marvelous. She's done a lot of these workshops across the area. So we're again, as I said earlier, the academic piece we've got down. We've got successful outcomes. Now our attention is now focused on these issues of leadership skill building, so the women don't run into those kinds of problems in the future.
Yeah. So I just wanted to point out that the solution which you ended up finding was like asking someone else, right? Finding an advocate and getting someone else. And so I think in every leadership workshop we have, I end up telling them a story that's something along the lines of, you got to ask someone else. Like, use your voice. Don't take no for an answer. That person wasn't willing to help you. You come ask me, you ask another person in the lab, to really get them to believe in their voice and that it's okay for them to ask for things. Even sometimes, like if they don't ask for things, then I'm going to get mad at them. So they have to, like, I'll make them, I'll make it like a homework assignment. Like, you're going to send me an email as soon as you go ask that person. And so basically to teach them that they can that they should be asking other people for things. And that's a crucial part of their success, because they are going to hit other obstacles. They're absolutely going to hit other obstacles like that. And it could be as simple as the advisor saying, oh, no, you can't go to that conference because I'm not going to pay for it. They'd be like, okay, well, now I got the money, so now I guess I'm going, Yes,
I've now re-entered academics after a large number of years in government segment. But one of the things is our young women are facing different types of put-downs than, say, I did. Mine were pretty obvious, as Rita just said. They were along that line. But what we're trying to do at UT Arlington is we have a group of women, and they're still getting put-downs, but it's different. But we're getting some people who are good at improv.
Yes.
Because knowing humor and how to nail the other person. I mean, the examples I give would be gross, so we will not give them. Because that's what I had to deal with. But the improv turns out to have two valuable things. One is it acknowledges what's going on. It also turns it on the person. May embarrass them for a while, but usually it's minimalistic. And it makes you feel a lot better. And then you can move forward. So, I mean, I can think of several situations. Just a mild one would be if Hillary had said to the person, audience, is that somebody stalking me? It would have changed the tone. And that's what improv does, is it changes tone. And so we're getting a professional improv, and then we've recruited a woman in our biology department who is, that. So I just
We've had a lot of joy ourselves with improv.
Yeah, so one of the great things about the Hunter program is that Johnny McNulty, I guess, is involved in improv and gives with his colleagues. So we actually do have an improv workshop every spring semester, and the students, the scholars, they love it. To be honest, we've always framed it in terms of presentations. I've never framed it in terms of dealing with difficult discussions with conflict, and that's an interesting angle, which I could see myself engaging in. I want to put something else. So one of the things which she was bringing up is that using improv classes as a way of dealing with someone putting you down in some way or putting you in an uncomfortable position, or potentially doing an unconscious, a microaggression, dealing with microaggressions. So I'm also involved in the leadership of a large software development, open source software development project, which is a very male dominated, and any online culture tends to have difficulty with creating a supportive and welcoming environment. So it's something which we dedicate a lot of effort to. And in the context of that, we've worked really hard on our code of conduct. And I'm seeing an increasing need and expertise growing in codes of conduct, you can call it. So codes of conduct started off initially as like how to get rid of sexual, how to deal with not even get rid of sexual harassment, basically just to punish sexual harassment, not actually to prevent it. And so I see codes of conduct, and sometimes they're now called like rules of engagement, about how we talk to each other and what is acceptable tone, what is acceptable language usually it's a community. I am starting to strongly believe that we need to have rules of engagement set in our classrooms, and especially in our lab environments when we're setting up, if collaborative work is going to be a part of a classroom, which in my opinion it should always be, there needs to be a discussion with the professor and among all the students about this is how we talk to each other, this is what's not acceptable. And when someone says something that's inappropriate, this is what we say. And so in my community, we just say code of conduct. Code of conduct? Like, were we just a little over the line there? And so just as a thing moving forward, that's a way that I would actually like to systematically minimize and deal with and actually have a rule in place. Like when someone presents you with a microaggression, this is what we do.
Yeah, great. Please.
Yes, hi, thank you all so much. You mentioned teaching the students how to deal with the unwritten rules. And a lot of the conversation that we've all been having here is about what can the students and the trainees do differently. But I would say that another really important aspect of maintaining this is how can the unwritten rules be different?
Yeah.
And that's not, it can't, if you put everything on the student, nothing's gonna be permanent.
Mm-hmm.
And how can you recast the question, the problem to the powers that be, who are the individuals responsible for the organization's success and leadership positions, to say, you have talent here that you are underutilizing, that you could access, and put it as something that's going to promote the organization's well-being, rather than you're doing something wrong by not letting this group have access or that group has access, and you have to lower your standards. I've seen a lot of effort by my institution and others. How do we change this at the leadership level? But what programs actually work for this? That's what I'm wondering.
I think we've definitely seen that as our role as a funder because of the leverage we have, asking those questions, asking for those numbers, asking what the policies are, and at every step of the way. And
It's not a program.
Yeah.
You can't do that with a program.
And you, Teri, have been so systemic.
Right. So that example I was telling you about working with the dean and having them rethink how do we do tenure and promotion? How do we do hiring processes, and how are our structures actually contributing to this, right? Because we get the implicit bias, we get the individual interactions, et cetera, but our structures, our systems have been created out of that implicit bias, right? So when you say you have to have a degree from this kind of institution in order to be successful here, but we know that this kind of institution does not have a lot of women or people of color, that's a structural inequity, right? And so we're not, and again, I see everything that we do at the Institute when we talk about change, when we talk about our goal of achieving the advancement of women, we do it on the individual skill level, which is that leadership development, working with students, working with faculty, et cetera, but then also on the systemic level. And that's that policy analysis, that's that talking with leaders about what are your practices, and having them as groups actually systemically analyze, address, and continue that process. And I wanted to say that the role of both philanthropy from private foundations, but also large grant programs like the NSF Advance program are what helps make these things happen, because it is such an enormous investment for companies, organizations, educational institutions to do, that it can't just be done typically without, I don't know, you'd have to have an amazing leader who has a lot of individual power to be able to say, we're going to dedicate millions of dollars to this issue specifically. It doesn't typically happen, but when you have philanthropy or federal grants, et cetera, coming in and acting as that agent to push, then you begin to be able to look at more of that systemic change. Now, as a fully successful, no, it's an extremely challenging piece, but you have to maintain that effort over time. And that's where I think we often lose it. That, you know, you can have that conversation with a dean or with a president or a provost, and they can rethink things and maybe shift their awareness level. But the default is to go back to what we've always done. And if you're not constantly pushing on that, and not just me as an individual, it's everyone that needs to do that, then you're not going to see that change over time.
Yeah, let me just make one comment, and just to parlay on that is that, you know, we're in a position finally where we have, you know, a president, provost, and College of Arts and Sciences who really are like-minded. It takes a certain synergy to really make this happen more quickly, and that's difficult at the academic level, as we've heard today. But you know, you got to just wish for that little, you know, moment in time when the stars are aligned. And for us, it's we're there. So, but
or just work at it for 12 years.
Exactly.
Okay, last question, and then I'll ask you to wrap.
So something that struck me quite a bit was this idea that it's about the cultural, and what I can give my kids when they apply to everything, they know the rules. I know the rules. I know how to speak. I know what you wear, what you eat, when you go, all these things. That's what really struck me the most. Is that's a huge piece for people trying to get into these places.
I don't think it's a coincidence. We found out as we were sitting down that all three of us are first-generation college students. And I don't think that's coincidence. So we all have doctorates, right? But we're all also working to advocate for change. And I think, I don't know, I mean, we didn't talk about it not being a coincidence, but I feel that when you've had that experience, you recognize that there's more to just getting into academia, that pipeline, you know.
And that's so much about the spirit of the foundation, frankly. John McNulty, his parents were Irish immigrants. He grew up in Southwest Philadelphia. Education was transformative for his family and the opportunities that he got later. And so I think that really does motivate and inspire us. Okay, will you leave us with last words for this esteemed audience and the leaders here and advocates for women in STEM? What do you ask of them, or what are your last remarks?
So I was just thinking about the last question about how difficult big institutional change is, and I agree. I'm only like 1 year past tenure, and I'm just starting to realize, I'm starting to eke out like, okay, do I have the power to do this yet? Like, who can I talk to about this yet? And I do feel like I've had those little where I've been able to influence a dean's decision. I've been able to influence a rubric in one hiring committee, and so I do want to, counter this a little bit, which is like doing real institutional long-term change is super hard. But that doesn't mean that in each of the leadership roles that we have, whether it's, a graduate student being in on the graduate admissions process, or a junior faculty member, having some role in how we evaluate the graduate students, right? And we can always bring this lens into every situation that we're in order to increase the awareness of how important, and also how many resources there are, how much research there is, and best practices there are with respect to all these steps, which in academia we typically don't adopt. And so I think that there is a lot of room for us as individuals with the power that we have at each stage to make a big difference, whether it's going up a little bit at our peer level, and then definitely you can have a huge impact with your students and your peers in terms of being part of their peer network and helping them say no or navigate obstacles.
Paul?
On a nuts and bolts level, I've had a lot of involvement with my development and advancement people at St. Joseph's. So yes, I think that's really where I think it can happen for all of you. Faculty need to be involved. Plug yourselves in. We now use McNulty as a leverage point for other donors, and they're, once they realize about the program and its impact, they're willing to step up to the plate and participate, because they don't want to be left out of this movement, of this momentum. Again, from in the weeds, all of you can try to affect change at that level.
Teri?
I like to tell the individuals that I work with that every single one of you is responsible for equity. Every single one of you has to be a champion for that. If you're in education, that is your job. And as such, think about using your voice, as Kelly and Paul said, and making sure that you are doing everything you can within your sphere of influence, whatever that may be, to create impact. And we have 4 guiding principles for leadership at the Institute, and they are influence, impact, equity, and change agency. And if you're following those 4 things, no matter what your sphere is, you will be a change agent.
And just for the junior people in the room, your sphere of influence could be very small, right? So put your own gas mask on first, right? Don't try to go to the department chair or the dean just yet.
Right.
So be very careful with who your sphere of influence is, and to be sure you can be effective in that sphere.
Thank you, each one. Thank you very much.